The debate around crime and immigration, it has become one of the most polarizing things in America. But let's look beyond the shouting matches and political posturing. There lies a deeper question: what actually works? For a majority of the time during Biden administration, we were lied to. We were told there's no problem at the border. Immigration is not an issue. But we saw the uprisings in places like Chicago, where so many different groups like Chicago Flip Red and Chicago Red were birthed from the immigration issue. But has the recent drop in violent crime come from better policing, smarter strategies, or something far more controversial? Mass deportations. Today, we're joined by an expert who doesn't just skim the headlines. He's been in the trenches of the justice system for decades. He's argued before the Texas Supreme Court, authored one of the most widely used guides in the bail industry, and has written extensively on what real reform should look like, not what Illinois passed for bail reform. His voice is sharp. His voice is sharp, informed, and unafraid. Ken W. Good is here to help us unpack the facts, challenge the narratives, and ask the hard questions others won't. Ken, welcome to Detroit's Morning Answer.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
I really appreciate it, especially for a time where we find ourselves as a nation. Let's go right to it. Some people claim the recent dip that we've seen in violent crime is linked to mass deportations. Is there any data or causation to support that claim, or is it just political spin?
No, there's a recent article from the Federalist that supports this. And it just, we've gotten to the point where the narrative is just so politicized that you can't look at studies anymore. I mean, it's almost like I wrote an article that says you can believe your eyes. I mean, we keep being told you can't believe your eyes are lying to you. But, we know what works. We've already been told we can't control the border. We need a new statute. And it turned out we just need a new president. And the same thing's true of crime.
Yeah.
We know how to get crime down. We've just been lied to and told that there's no way to do it anymore, and that it's not fair to the criminals to do it. And so we're measuring it differently.
Yeah. When you look at Clinton, you look at Obama, you look at President George W. Bush, nobody had a problem with mass deportations. Ken, from a legal standpoint, how do you assess the constitutionality and practicality of mass deportations as a crime fighting tool?
Well, how do we assess that as a crime fighting tool? Well, the biggest argument we're hearing right now is that all of these deportations violate due process and what we're being lied to about, because this is all about identity politics.
Yep.
Well, because what we're being lied to is that different people here get different types of due process. So the people who already have an order of deportation because they went to a hearing and lost, then they get the smallest amount of due process. They are only allowed to file a writ of habeas corpus, either denying that they are that person, denying that they are that person that they're seeking to deport, because they've already gotten due process from the criminal justice system. But we are hearing the opposite from the press. You're being, they need due process. Essentially, they get a do-over, and that's just, absolutely false. It's intended just to delay the president, slow him down, and try to get past his presidency so they can get another Democrat in office and reverse course.
Due to the recent bombing of Iran, Tom Homan actually had he was being interviewed because I think so many times people think that the border issue is just a Mexican and Canadian issue. It's not. I want you to hear what Tom Homan had to say. Now, I really would love to get your take on what he had to say, and for a broader question, I think the American people really need to understand what's at stake.
So I pulled numbers this morning just from a CBP under Joe Biden. There was 1,272 nationals of Iran released in the country between OFO and the Border Patrol. And you compare that to the Trump administration, zero, right? Zero releases. And right now, because of President Trump's leadership, we have the most secure border in my lifetime, most secure border in the history of this nation. So we have a secure border. That was President Trump's big win on securing this nation. So we're not releasing people in this country, especially when just aliens aren't crossing that border undetected. But under Joe Biden, we had over 10 million people cross that border. But my biggest concern from day one beyond the fentanyl, beyond the sex trafficking women and children, were the 2 million known gotaways. Over 2 million people crossed that border. We don't know who they are, where they came from, because they got away, because Border Patrol was so overwhelmed with the humanitarian crisis that Biden created that over 2 million people crossed the border and got away. That is my biggest concern, and that's what created the biggest national security vulnerability this country's ever seen.
Ken, is the border czar Tom's Homan correct in his assessment? And why is that important for people that are listening to this program?
Absolutely. He's absolutely correct. And why is that important? Because this is how the debate is being politicized. From the left, all we hear about is my child caregiver is being deported. The person who's doing the work that the Americans won't do is being deported. They completely ignore violent offenders, people who are committing crimes, and so they won't even discuss that. They just ignore it, and because it's all about identity politics. But the problem is when you take a step back.
Yeah.
I mean, the arguments that they're making is the same argument that that were made to defend slavery and why we shouldn't get rid of slavery, because they're doing the work that the rest of the country will refuse or refusing to do. And I mean, can you imagine in 2025 that the far left of this country is essentially making the same argument defending slavery
Yeah.
to defend why we should keep illegal immigrants in the country so that we have a two-tier system. We have a bunch of people living underneath the society at below the level of really poverty.
My
As
God.
I mean that's just ridiculous.
You know, I want to talk about the bail system. Illinois became the first state to eliminate cash bail entirely. The progressives were, I mean, they were so ecstatic, Ken. I know because I lived there. You've written extensively about the dangers of broken bail systems. Could the bail reform movement, especially in left leaning cities, have played a larger role in past crime spikes than immigration?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a study from Yolo County in California where he kept all this data during COVID, and he compared the difference between someone released on what I call these simple bail release mechanisms, which is what Illinois is now implementing, versus somebody released on a private surety bond. And he found when you compare the two people, the very same, low level offenders, nonviolent offenders, one release, simple release with, no supervision, just their promise to come back versus somebody that's released on a private surety bond. The person that's just simply released has a 200% greater chance of committing a violent offense in the next 18 months.
Mm.
So I think that study shows when you create a release mechanism system that has no accountability, of course you're going to see an increase in crime
Yeah.
because criminals see that as a green light to commit more crime. And there's a whole bunch of other reasons. The biggest is the failure to appear are so much higher that creates backlogs. Backlogs create pressure on the courts to dismiss cases so that they can keep up. And when you dismiss cases, criminals see that as a green light to commit more crime, and that's what they do.
Yeah. Ken, from your experience and your experience arguing before high courts, how have how should I say this? How have crime trends impacted judicial decision making, especially regarding bail, detention, and release policies?
Well, okay, so you could start out by saying that these urban areas had a good intent, or part of their coalition did. They want to protect the poor, but then they implement policies that tie the hands of judges so that they have no discretion. So they'll make a list of crimes that say, if you're arrested for this crime, no matter how many times, you're going to be released pursuant to one of these simple release mechanisms. But they're just called different things in different states. And that's what's the problem. Because then the judges have no discretion to address career criminals, gangs, or organized crime. And those groups figure out ways to make millions and millions of dollars because the court can't do anything to them and it just creates a system where why wouldn't crime increase? If
Right.
you look at it, you go, surely if you do this, crime will increase, and it's because politics has overtaken the system greater than it ever has before in the name of all kinds of different things. Progressive policies in the name of identity politics, in the name of we've got to be more fair because of past things that supposedly have done, and they all just lead to the same conclusion. We just need to put up with more crime. They just won't say it.
Yeah. Michigan, they've actually introduced a lot of their own pretrial reform efforts. But and Michigan lawmakers, just like a lot of the progressive cities, they often cite racial equity. I hate that word equity. They don't
Mhm.
understand that word equity. They talk about racial equity and fairness when pushing bail reform. What would you say to them as someone who has seen the let's call it what it is, the unintended consequences play out in real time?
The very people they say that they are trying to help, it is those racial groups that get hurt the most by these very policies. Because as crime goes up, it goes up faster in our minority community.
Yeah.
Because crime is by and large, we commit crime on the same minority group that we are, the same racial group that we live in. There's a reason why 50% of all murders in the United States are done on young black males or black males. And by and large, the murderers of those people are the same, black males. And somehow in this upside down world that we see in our urban areas, we decided to implement policies to uh, favor the young black male murderer over the black male victim.
That is so true. I've done a lot of work in criminal justice reform. I do believe this system that we've created. Basically, I hate that we've become a revenue generating form of government. It would just be they. So many people are upset with law enforcement when law enforcement is enforcing laws that the general assemblies across this nation are passing, and I don't think a lot of people understand that. Why do you think, in your estimation? Why do you think police get so much flack when they're only following what a lot of these blue cities are passing in these state houses to collect revenue? How do we change that?
Well, I mean, politics has always played a part in it, but it's to such a level now that I don't. I mean, you have to take politics of that level out. I mean, you can trace this where in the past 6 months before a general election, something would happen. They would find some minority person that they would argue had been wrong, and the purpose of that was to uh, create a mob and make them angry and have
Yep.
all these protests, and it was to drive turnout for the upcoming election, and it worked.
Yeah.
The problem is when you create a mob, you lose control of the mob, and
Yeah.
so what the mob discovered was after the election was over, the politicians just returned exactly to what they were doing. So now the mob, the far left, is electing people who will do what the politicians used to only promise but never follow through with. And so now we have the far left enacting policies that were never intended to do anything other than to increase turnout to win the next election.
Yeah.
And so now we're faced with the mob, and they've lost control over it. And you can see that. Look at the election that we just had the last few days in New York for mayor.
Yeah.
I mean, the coalition on the left right now that wins the election is the Wall Street pays for it or funds it, and then they focus on social policies and leave the businesses alone. Well, that program or that coalition has been destroyed, and you can see that really close or really clear in the New York mayoral race.
Yeah.
So Wall Street's not going to support that anymore, but they don't think they need them, and so we're going to find out really quick what's Wall Street going to do,
Yeah.
and we're going to see with Eric Adams' independent uh, run for governor whether he's going to have a whole bunch of money and still lose, or whether there's going to be a new coalition that gets him arrested. We're going to see that across the country. I mean, I saw someone come out in the last week with a clip saying party has not selected a candidate without the elites doing it for them
Yep.
for president for the last 3 elections.
Yep.
So Hillary was selected by the elite. So was Biden and probably Obama too.
Yep.
But no, Kamala, Biden, and Hillary. So if the party had their choice, they would have elected a far left candidate, and that's the reason why the elite stepped in. Well, now I don't think the party can step in anymore, and we're going to have a far left, and we're going to see this all lay out clear in the mayoral race and in the next presidential race, because their argument is the reason why we're not winning is we're just not going far left enough. Well, they're in control now, and they're going to go far left,
I
and
agree.
those policies have killed government everywhere they've been enacted.
Yeah.
And so we have to oppose it because it's a policy that where they've outsourced criminal justice reform
Yep.
and they've outsourced immigration reform to activists.
Yep.
Activists never admit their policies are wrong. They
So
will
true.
always say, "Oh, we just need more time," or "There's a reason we just didn't release enough criminals to get less crime."
You know, it's so crazy that it's laughable. Can follow me with this, okay? Because I never understand how they're not able to build a RICO case and why they can't find the collusion. When you look at the college riots and how they were well organized, when you look at the LA riots, the immigration riots, you know, they had pallets of bricks. And when you look at what happened with Garner, Floyd, Gray, Brown, how they're able to just coalesce so quickly. Why hasn't, do you think AG Pam Bondi, Cash Patel, Dan Bongino are trying to find where that nexus is and who's funding these type of things? Because these are terrorists attacking our country. What can we do about these organized riots that happen and finding the true source of who's supporting them?
What you're saying is so true. And can you imagine where we've been? Because just 3 years ago, if you had made the statement you're making, you would be called such a conspiracy theorist
Yeah.
that you would be. That would be their response, and they would never. Now, they're hiding, and so I believe, yes, that's being looked at very clearly from the most recent protests, and they're mostly peaceful. Which, if you're saying mostly, they're not peaceful ever. But the problem's going to be, the the local the local everything in the urban cities is going to be in tune to hiding that,
Yeah.
and so it's going to be very difficult to figure it out. But I do believe that they're looking at it, and it needs to be looked at because I mean, look at just the what happened since we bombed Iran. And you can see that clearly the same thing that we see in our criminal justice system happens there. And what happened is immediately in the aftermath, some bureaucrat saw some report that said this could either have been something that had little impact on their nuclear program, or it could have been devastating to their nuclear program. We don't know. We have little confidence. So the only thing that was leaked is the assessment that this would have only delayed their nuclear program by 2 months, by a couple months. And so that was the first thing that was reported. And we see that all over the place. You have to demonize the people that are in support of law enforcement. We have to minimize the people who are showing what immigration reform actually the good of it. And now we're doing it to the extent where we have to minimize the benefits of all the risks taken by our military to make us more safe. And it's because if they were to admit it was correct,
Yeah.
it undermines everything they have, and they would start losing elections left and right. So this is, Trump is not a threat to democracy. He is a threat to the Democrat Party.
Come on.
And it looks like the Democrat Party, they put party over country time after time after time on the far left.
This is so true. Ken, I've been in radio for 6 years and I've been saying this for 6 years. I have been called Uncle Tom, Coons, I'm stupid, I'm dumb, I am a conspiracy theorist. But I always look at these things from the perspective of how I took on cases when I was a cop. I was a death investigator. I was a hostage crisis negotiator. So I just the facts. I don't allow emotion to dictate how I come to a conclusion. And if more people did that, oh my goodness, where will we be in society again?
Absolutely. And, I face that sometimes too. But I'm not called Uncle Tom, but this is what I say. If you call me a racist with my argument,
Yep.
then what you're saying is you have no response to the merits of what I'm saying. So you have to resort to attacking, you have to use attacking language, and that language which is intended to cut off debate because you have no response on the merits. That's what's going on.
Amen. Ken W. Good, we got to leave it right there. He's a respected attorney, author, and legal scholar based in Texas. Please read his the Goods on Bail and also his article, What Successful Bail Reform Looks Like. Thanks so much for joining us on Detroit's Morning Answer, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
Had a great time.
All right. So did I. I love that conversation. I love when I have people like Ken W. Good on.